just as I will add to that introduction, I run the solutions business for Dell, which comprises of everything outside of laptops and desktops, right? Servers, networking, the software, putting up all of those big environments. That's the business that I run. What I also do and where I come from is I used to be the technologist for Asia Pacific at one point of time at Dell. Now technologists are a geek brand, and I come from that history. Now, one of the things that I find interesting is working with a lot of the startup ecosystem and seeing it through. And I've seen a fair bit of my share of startups that have done extremely well, right? And I'm still engaged with many of them. I'm going to talk of some of them today. I'm not supposed to give you names, but I'm guessing you'll figure it out. Now, I didn't want to go and get into what we do, how we do it, and all of that. I've got one slide at the end of everything that talks a little bit about that. But what I'm going to talk about today is what are the mistakes that most startups make whilst getting ready for the future. Now, a lot of you have seen this line, right? Software is where everything is going. A lot of you are in that space. If you're not in that space, or if you're in the manufacturing space, I'll give you some of those examples as well. And two of the examples I want to talk about is PhonePe and Tesla, right? All of you have heard about them, right? Let's talk about Tesla first. What do they make? Do they make cars? Do they make electric cars? What's the story that they are selling? Alternative mobility, self-driving. Are they selling eco-friendly? Yes. Is it eco-friendly? No? Everybody agrees? The amount of carbon emission to charge a Tesla and get it onto the road is always higher than the cost of running a fossil fuel car. What they are selling is the software that they've put into it, right? They're selling the ability to, and I rented one of them last time I was in the US. You can stand at your hotel doorstep, switch on the key, and reverse it out of the parking lot, and it comes to you. It is supremely cool, right? It doesn't get better than that. What they are selling is the ability to get onto the freeway, take your hands off the wheel, and it just follows the lane perfectly, right? 30 miles to work, you don't touch the wheel until you have to get into a parking slot. What they are selling is software. The car is actually secondary. It's actually not very efficient. It actually has terrible range. It charges really slowly, comparatively. Unless you find a supercharger, it's going to take you 8 hours to 9 hours to fully charge the car. Even if you do find a supercharger, in the time you do lunch, you'll get about 40%, right? But what it does do is do everything that you don't want to do typically while driving the car. And that's the story that they are selling. I want to talk about the second one, PhonePe. I work a lot with PhonePe, but that's not what I'm going to talk about. The concept of transferring money is not a new concept, right? There's a lot of startups that have done it, and they've done it better in some ways. I'm a big Paytm user, right? Now, the place where how many of you here have both Paytm and PhonePe, right? Where do you use Paytm? Where do you use PhonePe? So, okay, so I'm going to talk about it from a little more from a convenience standpoint, but if you look at transferring money to the shopkeeper, you walk into a shop, you're buying something, you're buying a bottle of water, and you want to pay the guy. There is nothing like paying it from a Paytm wallet. It takes seconds, right? But if you want to pay your bills, if you want to pay your electricity bill, your phone bill, your data bill, your all of those things, PhonePe is simply more convenient because it'll go fetch all of those data and it'll tell you, okay, at the end on the 15th of every month, click pay, right? What they are selling is an ecosystem of tied applications. They've gone and tied into the Airtel application. They've gone and tied into the ACT application. They've gone and tied into the Hathway application. They've gone and tied into the BSNL application. And that's the convenience that they are trying to sell. The convenience of how to go and make that payment is the whole concept. Now, the point that I wanted to bring out here is that every one of these, both of these guys started fairly small, right? PhonePe, I know for a fact, they started with eight boxes in the back room of Flipkart. No one ever thought that it was going to make anything, right? They are bigger, they're second biggest right now, I'm assuming, and they're growing faster than you will believe. I sometimes find it tough to believe. The point there is that every time, and the same with Tesla, right? When they started, they were trying to sell a car. Today, the number of updates that they push out, the number of features that they are adding to their car on a weekly to every week to every 3-week basis. Worst case scenario is 3 weeks, otherwise it's every week. Do you know the other thing that they're doing extremely efficiently? They're collecting data. The reason the Teslas are so good at self-driving is because every Tesla is loading back data into the ecosystem. All of that is infrastructure. All of that is data. I'm going to talk about these two things a little later. Now, I said I'll talk about what are the mistakes that a lot of people make. There are 4 base premises behind that, and I'm going to switch around the order a little bit. And I'm paranoid about security as a person. I've probably spent more money at home than most enterprises spend, but so security is fairly dear to me, and I want to try and explain how bad the environment is today. The second is data. What Tesla does is collect and analyze all of that data that cars are giving them. The data that they collect from people who have paid for a car is worth more to them than the money they made from the car. Did you understand that? And that's what they are selling, right? The third piece I want to talk about is scale. Now, this is something that it hurts sometimes when I see this. Not everything needs to scale. But when it does need to scale, if it cannot, it results in a halt of business, right? What I'm trying to explain, never let technology be the hindrance to progress. That's the third piece. And the fourth piece is workforce. And this is something that I personally believe in. I know that some of you may not have employees per se, but there is one commodity on this planet that cannot be bought back, and that's time. When you hire somebody, what you are buying is time. When I work for Dell, what I'm selling Dell is time. The value of that time is what you want to go and try and optimize, right? I'm going to talk a little bit about that as well. The first piece is security, and I'm going to tell you 2 stories. There's a small startup, 20 people in Outer Ring Road in Bangalore, that does outsourced design work for a bunch of European clients. I'm personally engaged over there. There's a lot of work that they do. An employee left, right? He went and joined another 2-man startup with a whole bunch of client list that he took off an Excel sheet from here. Is that breach of security? Could it have been controlled? Yes? Has anyone ever thought about it? Unlikely. I'll give you another example. There's a slightly bigger startup based out of Delhi. There's another startup based out of Delhi. They've spent a fair bit of money on security, right? And they went and bought commercial grade security, right? what they do is banking audits on behalf of a larger auditor, right? There are these large audit firms. None of them do it themselves. They go and outsource it to some third party to go do. He's one of them, right? And firewalls are supposed to keep you safe. About a year and a half ago, his client said that there is a set of data that was transferred to you a year earlier that has come back through their audit channels, through his client's audit channels. How did it get out? Right? He's completely lost business. They went defunct after that. Right? Why? Because it was financial transactions and somebody got through the firewall. There's a story that I like to say about security. There are only two kinds of people: those that have been hacked and those that don't know. For a year and a half, he didn't even know that it had happened, right? Painful learning, but he didn't know that it had happened. Now, here's the other interesting piece about this. He actually had spent the money, right? He had not spent a crazy amount of money, but he had actually spent money on security. Now, the question then arises, what is that line on security that you want to go and spend on, right? There are two stages to security which we believe in. One is to protect the perimeter. The second is to protect data. How many of you have tried getting into an AWS server? Yeah? Well, I've tried it many times. You can get the data out, right? Can you make any sense of it? It's actually quite easy to copy the data out. Yeah, you can SSH into it and FTP the data out, actually. The problem with doing that is that the data means nothing. It's 256-bit asymmetric key SSL encrypted. If you had the equipment to go decrypt it, you'd use that equipment for a lot more money, right? You wouldn't spend that kind of equipment to go decrypt it. That's not the cheap way of doing things, by the way. That's the expensive way of doing things. But it doesn't mean that it's not possible to go do. Now, there's one set of people that go and spend money on a perimeter firewall. They go spend the basic perimeter firewall and hope that nobody's trying to get into your network. How many of you log your network traffic? You, for the company? How many of you log network traffic? Everything?
We just put like a middleware in a .NET or Spring MVC application, and then we have written like a logger for Kibana.
So let me ask you this. On your external IP addresses, how many brute force attempts do you get a week?
I think we have only detected it twice or thrice, but may have happened many more times.
Okay. So I run a public IP at home. At home, I get about 2 a week. If you have an IP address, public IP address, you are being hacked. Guaranteed, right? And this is at home. If it was a IP address registered to Dell Incorporated, it'll be a lot more. I can't imagine what that is. I actually don't know. If you are going to secure the perimeter, go secure the perimeter in a way that it does not make sense for somebody to go make an attempt. This does not mean spending money. The total money that I've spent on my home firewall system is 7,000 rupees. Right? I will almost bet that no one will get through. Right? I've bought 2 of those NUC machines and I run an open source firewall system on it. It's hard iron down. You can't afford to do that if you're a company, right? You have to leave some things open. But it's not necessary to go spend money. Money doesn't mean security, is the point that I wanted to bring out. What you need to go do is to figure out what is the way and how far do you want to go iron wall your external access, right? The second piece is about the data that you have. Um, People coming in from outside is one, people inside is another. It is not expensive to encrypt today. There used to be a time when it used to be prohibitively expensive. There are n number of open source solutions. There are n number of startups doing that, right? But figure out where you're going to go spend the money on security. Two pieces, protect, and there's a lot more to security. There's audit, I'm not even going there. There are two pieces that you have to think of first. Protect the perimeter and protect the data. The easiest way to do that is to iron wall the perimeter, and the second thing that you need to do is to go encrypt data, right? Now, there are a couple of things that you have to think of while doing that, and I've put some of that over here. One of the pieces that I also want to talk about is recovery. Eventually, somebody's going to get through, right? Somebody is going to get through. The hacker ecosystem is far, far better at it than the security ecosystem. They are bigger, they are better equipped, and they are simply smarter because there's more money there, right? When it does happen, if you get held ransom, you will lose so much money that it's not worth it. If you've heard of 10 ransomware attacks that have happened in the country, let me assure you it's 100 times as bad. Because 90% of companies don't talk about it. 99% of companies don't talk about it. They just pay it. Right? There's another breed that says, you get in, you're not going to be able to make sense of my data. If you manage to lock out my data, I will wipe and reinstall. There's a large bank that I was working with, right? Bank. If any of you have worked in the corporate ecosystem, I will bet that you have an account with them. Not Indian bank, global bank, right? They got held for ransom on their business banking environment. Their business banking environment, a group of Russian hackers, not one, a group of Russian hackers got into and asked them for some crazy money to go do it. They were down for 3 days. That is big money for a bank, by the way. But it was still cheaper than going and paying them. What did they do? They just wiped everything. Right? It is not uncommon to go see that. When you hear stories that this company is offline for the next 48 hours for maintenance, right? 48 hours maintenance windows don't exist in banks today, right? Something happened. Figure out how you are going to recover. When that breach happens, have a plan to say that this is how I'm going to go recover. That's the second biggest piece of security, right? The next piece that I want to talk about is plan. Plan for scale. Now, a lot of people don't do this, right? And I'm in many cases I'm one of them. When you and all of you have started, you're trying to get your product out of the window. You're more focused on your business, right? Correct? If you don't start planning for what is likely to happen, when it happens, what you've done in the past will come to haunt you. Let me give you a story, give you an example there. There's a startup in Calcutta that we did a ton of work to switch over, right? They went and bought, when they were small, when they were really small, they went and bought this fancy red color logoed CRM system, right? It didn't cost them much, by the way. It didn't cost them much, because if you're small and you want to go set up a CRM from a big 5 player, they will give it to you at almost nothing, right? They grew and kept growing to a point where they crossed the threshold of 100,000 entries. They crossed 100,000 customers. Now, when you cross 100,000 customers, the licensing model changes. At that point, they were adding close to 7,000 customers a day, right? When they hit that, I think it was 1 million users. That line switchover was 1 million entries. They were adding 7,000 users a day, and they didn't have a choice. Didn't have a choice, right? If you're at 1 million users, you're adding 7,000 a day, and you've already got a process going for IT, you don't have a choice. They spent close to 7-8% of their that quarter's budget, everything budget, to pay the software company to buy licenses. Why? Because they hadn't planned for it. That number was about $2 million. They got $70 million in funding. 2 million of that went on one software licenses not implemented, right? It was ridiculous. The guy he was visibly hurt. It costed less than $180,000 to get out of it, but it took 6 months, right? The get out of it, my team did, which is why you could see the pain. The get out of it didn't cost much. And they moved to an open source system, they moved to a highly scalable system, they cleaned up all the data, and they made the switch over. But for 1 year, he spent so much money that he was visibly distraught over it. Right? Money that could have very easily been spent in growing business. Right? The problem that happens is that you're not planning for the next step. If you look at the big successes in the visible successes, one of the more common things that you'll see is that they have not changed structure of doing business over time. And I'm talking the method of doing business has largely not changed. They've made improvements, they've made modifications, they've made additions, but they've not changed method of doing business. I am not saying go set up $1 million today for what might not happen. Start as small as possible, but get your structure right? So that the process of doing business remains the same whether it is 100 customers or 1 million customers. The third piece that I wanted to talk about is data. Yes.
How far do you plan for, and how do you organize your organization structure so that you can spend on security, infrastructure, and what kind of a structure would work?
I'm not saying spend anything. Spend for 3 months.
Okay.
But structure for 2 years. Spend for 2 months. If you can spend every 2 months and not spend for later than that, do it. Right? Don't spend $1 more than you really need it, what you need today. But get your structure right. If you are going to set up a CRM, go set up a CRM that you know will be able to scale. If you're going to go, if you really need a CRM. By the way, and thinking back in hindsight, he didn't need a CRM when he set up a CRM. He could have very comfortably done that on an Excel sheet. Right? And a single desktop running Access would have been, and a good GUI guy writing a front-end interface for it would have been plenty. Which is what we finally ended up doing, by the way. Right? But that's the point. The point is don't try and go and don't invest in places where you know it's not going to be able to scale. Invest as little as possible, but invest for scale. Right? I'll give you another example. If you're given the choice of running it on a hypervisor or a container today, that's a blind question. I'd go put it on a container. Why? Because I can go scale it later. If I was going to run a single firewall versus a distributed firewall, I'd quietly go put it on a distributed firewall. Yes, it's going to be a little more pain setting it up, but I'd go do it that way simply because at a later point in time, I'm not going and reinventing the wheel. I'm not saying go invest, and absolutely don't. Never invest for long-term future. Invest for today. but invest with a plan of saying how that is going to go scale. The third piece is data. Now, my example here is another car company, right? The guys that run the three-pointed star, right? They do a huge research center in Chennai. Everybody knows that, right? Massive. They've got like 7,000 people. What do? They design the earlier system designed electronics for the engine, right? About a year and a half ago, about a year and a half ago, they came out with the first self-parking, right? It was terrible. If any of you have been in one of those, it never worked. You read any review about one of those cars self-parking itself, the damn thing never used to work. And then they went and started spending money on it. What was this one thing that they really spent money on? Did they spend money on the engineering? Because that was 60 people that went and put that together. What they spent money on is buying data from Tesla, right? For a small fortune, by the way. Really, is it worth that much? They went and bought data from people that had the data. And one of the people they bought it from was Tesla, right? It made the news, by the way, that invested so much in, right? The reason they did it is because they wanted the geometric designs of how parking works. And this is just self-parking, by the way. It's not self-driving, just self-parking. And they spent hundreds of millions of dollars to get the data. Hundreds of millions. Now, there is one absolute truth. The more you know, the more you can get out of it. Right? I'll give you another example. This is something that we as Dell do. How many of you have got how many of you have a Dell machine? For desktop, notebook, doesn't really matter. A fairly new one, yeah? Yeah? Have you ever got a notification saying that your NIC card is about to fail? Hard drive is about to fail? Any of those? No?
Yeah, when you touch the top corner and you hold it hard, then you get a blue screen of death.
That's different, right? It's already dead, right? But there's a lot of this stuff that there's a set of alerts that started coming about a year or 2 years ago called predictive alerts, right? How do we do it? Has anyone ever thought about that? How do you know that a hard drive is going to fail in 3 months? Usage patterns. We look at usage patterns. We look at average failure rate for that batch number, right? We look at vibration data that comes out of a hard disk, spinning disk, right? There's a lot of data that the small little management card that's sitting inside a machine is collecting, sending back to a small little cluster that sits in Singapore. It looks through and it sends back a small little notification saying there's a high probability that your NIC card is going to fail. Do you know what happened because of that? So everybody thinks that, by the way, all of you are, most of the customers that I talk to are extremely happy that, hey, you go figure things out in beforehand. Do you know what happened to Dell for that? We started predicting inventories, right? Otherwise, if your hard disk failed, I needed to ship overnight a hard drive to you, right? That costs money. I need to go replace that inventory in a hurry because something else may fail. The moment I started doing predictive alerts, I started going sea shipping across the globe on spares inventory. My net cost, in spite of replacing early and making customers happy, my net cost of spares and replacements fell down by 42%. That was huge. It was a stroke of genius, is what it was called. It is not about about what is possible and what is not. The point that I'm trying to make here is that every piece of data that you have, Dell has had this data forever, by the way, right? We've just not used it. We never thought that it was important, right? Every piece of data that you have might have a use in the future, might have a use in the future. You have no way of predicting it today. You have no way of knowing what is going to be important and what is not. One, try and find uses of your data. The second is collect everything that you can. There's another thing that I really like doing. Has anyone ever looked at a Google Gmail agreement that you signed when you first started up Google Gmail? It went through that agreement got hammered down in a U.S. Senate hearing about a year ago, right? Has anyone actually been through that? Everybody went click yes, agree, submit, right? The very early Google agreement that you signed, the very early Google agreement that you said accept, continue, says that they have a right to go through your email to look at what is it that you are doing and what not. Right? They actually took it out of the later agreements. About 3 years ago, they took it out. They still do it. I probably do. I don't know. Right? I'm considering the advertising that I get. I'm pretty sure they're doing it. So, so the point that I'm trying to make is that they actually thought of it a long time ago that some of this data will actually be useful. Right? Whoever thought that going and trying to sell somebody something that he's researching on the internet is going to have money? Right? Where does Google make its money? Google makes its money because you went on the internet and searched for a red color t-shirt. When you went and searched for a red color t-shirt, Google told somebody who sells t-shirts, hey, I have a bunch of people that are searching for a red color t-shirt. Would you like a list of those? I can send out a mail to them. That's why Google makes money, right? Now, me as a seller of red color t-shirts says that, hey, if I can go and target an email to everybody who's only interested in red color t-shirts, that's an awesome way to go spend my marketing dollars. It didn't exist before Google. The concept did not exist. Every piece of data that you can monetize is possible money for the future. Now, the algorithms, the methods, the ability to go monetize that data is starting to become more and more prevalent, by the way. Not even a year ago, 8 months ago, it required a fair amount of genius to go and pull out and write a basic ML script. That has changed, and it's changing every couple of weeks. Somebody or the other comes out with use cases, what you can go download and run it, right? The pace at which it is changing is, you cannot keep up. No one can, right? But the point that I'm trying to make is that if you're not already on that journey of saying, what else can I get out of my data? It's time to start. The last piece that I wanted to talk about, and I touched a little bit about it, is people. Right? Now, I'm a self-admitted workaholic. Right? If you a self-admitted workaholic that refuses to change his ways as well. Right? I enjoy what I do, and I typically spend about 12 hours of actual work. Now, in that 12 hours of actual work, and you should look at it for yourselves as well, in a given day, how much is actual work? How much is, yeah, I'm calling it work. Right? There was and it's not here, but there's a study that was done by, I'm going to say Bain, right? One of them, that said that about 30% of what is billable product, what Bain calls billable productive hours, is actual work. The rest of it is, right? Now, what happens to the rest of that time? When you start looking at employees and start looking at a team and start looking at people that you're paying for, easier than making them work more hours is to increase productivity, is to get that from 30 to 45. If you can get that to 55, you're at the top 5%. If you can get it to 65, you're in the top 0.1%. Nobody does, right? Which means that in a 10-hour or 8-hour productive day, 65% of the day, is it productive, is it not? No one can. The human brain is not capable of that. Somebody put up a slide in one of the things that said that the human attention span is lower than the fruit fly, which it is. I actually Googled it. There's actually a study done on it. Yeah, the fruit fly, the thing that flies around bananas, has a higher attention span than the average human being. What you are trying to do is to go get more work done out of that same workforce. Now, I'll give you my example. I live my life on that device. It's an iPad. I work for Dell. Why? Because that's what's going to keep me most productive. Should Dell let me use it? As an absolute truth, 2 years ago, I would not be allowed to carry that into office. I simply wouldn't. They wouldn't let me carry it into office. Today, they actually support it. Why? Because it makes me work 1% or 2% more. Right? What are the other things that you can go do to go improve that efficiency? What are the applications you can write to improve that efficiency? And I'll give you another example there. There's all of you are in the market to sell? Yes? How many of you have a selling environment that is very difficult to track? So I did a small project with a startup that sells namkeen. What is your packed Haldirams, but much smaller scale, right? Now, what is their selling methodology? He produces, he puts it into a truck, and this guy and the driver drives around the city saying, "Shopkeeper, replenish." He then, that's in the morning. He then does rounds in the evening, trying to get more shopkeepers on board. That's the model, right? If the product reaches more than X amount of age, you have to take it back. And it's junk. And the model was working great. It's been working well for 7-8 years, right? But there's only so many shops that he can do, because there's only so many shops that the vehicle can visit. There's only so many shops that he can visit. There's only so many places that he can track, and he won't know whether your wastage rate is high enough, is too high for me to go, and how much to go stock. About a year ago, we put data behind it, right? We started collecting which shop, how much, what return rate, and we put about 50 fields that we started filling up. His delivery guys revolted, right? I'll be honest. One of my guys was doing the training for this guy. He was furious. We went through pain going and implementing it, right? And everything was working well in the world. We started looking at this data, and we said that these shops are efficient, these shops are not, right? The next step was to go say, "Here, shopkeeper, I'm going to go give you inventory free. I want to see what the consumption rate is. Cost of inventory is 0. If you sell it, you pay me," right? But small inventories. He went and, so when we started this, he was at 130 shops which he was delivering to. Today he's at 7,000, right? Because we were able to get people trained on using it, because we were able to change a business model, because we were able to go effect a not very much liked change in his delivery workforce, right? Now, the delivery guy is not going and saying, shopkeeper, maal le lo thing. He lands up over there, he looks at his phone, takes a box, leaves it at the guy and gets into the truck and drives away. Because the shopkeeper has already logged into one small little app and said, I want 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The number of shops that the truck could visit increased. The number of the accuracy rate of the rate of return came down, right? Efficiency of delivery, what path he takes, which shops he stops at, where traffic is, what time he leaves, what time he comes back, which shops are open, which shops are not, do shops close for lunch? All of that went into the system. Today, the delivery boys love it. Why? Because they're not standing outside saying, le lo, kitna count, nothing. Everything gets counted overnight in the factory. Gets put inside a thing, he gets out, gives it to the guy and says, salam sir, leave. They like it. You've solved and I like to think of this as solving a business problem, but what we really did was solve a people problem, right? We improved the efficiency of his delivery system, right? Everything that you do when you're dealing with the workforce, what kind of devices you use, what kind of access you allow, what kind of flexibility you offer on time, all of that plays towards these few things of saying how efficient a workforce is going to be. And it's important to go play into that, right? So that's my last one. I can't end this without saying that what we do. So this is there, but what we do as Dell is I'm not going to say that it's I'm not going to say that it's something that that is all pervasive. We do bits and pieces, right? There are things that we are good at. There are things that I will tell you, hell no. I mean, it's not my cup of tea. But what we're really good at though is going and changing some of those small things in the periphery that actually make sense. Analytics, for example, we've built our ecosystem around. Workforce productivity, we've gone and built our ecosystem around. Going and sharing learnings from one place to another, we've learned to do extremely efficiently. Right? I want to give you another example of that. I kind of mentioned it in between, distributed firewalls, right? Distributed firewalls are not a new concept. It's less than 6 months old, right? 6 months ago, the only concept of the firewall is a firewall that sat between your internet and your data center or network. That's the whole concept of a firewall. Distributed firewalls are internet to device, nothing. On the device, you run a firewall, right? And then you start doing things to make sure that it's almost impossible to get through. There's an open source version called pfSense that's fairly popular, just so that everyone knows, right? Thank you.